The NIH releases a letter saying that the US has funded gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, directly contradicting many of the last statements made by Dr. Anthony Fauci over the last couple of months, and booster mandates might be coming a lot more quickly than you might think. That and more tonight on Pepp Talk. Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Pepp Talk. So, today we have two very important topics to discuss. The first of which is the fact that the NIH has released a letter to Congress saying that the US has indeed been funding gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China, which is directly contradicting many of the last statements made by Dr. Anthony Fauci over the previous couple of months and past year. So, for any of you who don't know what gain-of-function research is, it is essentially making a virus more transmissible or dangerous to humans. That is what it is in a nutshell. And knowing that, I'd like to move on to this article from science.org where it explains the situation quite well. Quote, while denying, once again, it had helped create the virus that sparked the COVID-19 pandemic, the U.S. National Institute of Health revealed in a letter sent yesterday to Congress that experiments it funded through a U.S.-based nonprofit in 2018 and 2019 at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China had the unexpected result of creating a coronavirus that was more infectious in mice, end quote. All right, so just to recap, the NIH released a letter to Congress saying that we've been funding some research in China that had the unexpected result of making coronavirus transmissible in mice. All right, so knowing that, the most logical follow-up question to that would be, what experiments were they doing? Let's find out. Quote, the NIH noted in its letter that when the agency reviewed the original EcoHealth grant proposal, EcoHealth is the group that they were funding the experiments through, it determined that the proposed experiments, which were designed to determine whether certain bat coronaviruses might infect humans, did not meet its definition of so-called gain-of-function experiments that can make pathogens more dangerous to humans. End quote. Let that sink in for a second. So the US has been funding experiments in China that were determined to find out whether or not certain bat coronaviruses might be transmissible to humans. And apparently this is not gain-of-function research because it is not making pathogens more dangerous to humans. This is quite an odd distinction. It's making it more transmissible but not dangerous. That's not really a distinction. It seems more like them trying to cover their butts, in my opinion. And it seems like that's the case with other articles calling them out as well. According to Roll Call News, quote, a U.S. partner of the Wuhan Institute of Virology manipulated a coronavirus to generate up to 10,000 times the viral load, violating provisions of its National Institute of Health contract that forbade unregulated research that could make a disease significantly more dangerous or transmissible, end quote. So, again, what is being said here is that U.S. taxpayer money has been funding experiments occurring in the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China in order to make bat coronaviruses more infectious, more transmissible to humans. And apparently that is not gain-of-function research because it's not making the virus more dangerous, it's just making it more transmissible. But again, that's not really a distinction at all. It's simply them just trying to cover their tracks, trying to get rid of the responsibility of the situation, in my opinion. And this really is interesting to hear this because over the past year and a half, we've heard our very famous virologist, Dr. Anthony Fauci, saying that we have not been funding gain-of-function research. I can promise you that. We aren't doing that. And, well, it turns out we are. Quote, the revelations complicate White House Chief Medical Advisor Anthony Fauci's previous statements that the NIH never funded research projects in Wuhan that gave pathogens new properties with the potential to cause any kind of pandemic, so-called gain-of-function research, end quote. Yes, it very much does complicate his statements. So you can go online, you can go on YouTube, look up various news articles of Dr. Fauci saying this, that the U.S. is not funding gain-of-function research. And in fact, well, yes, we have. Yes, we have. We've been funding experiments in the Wuhan Institute of Virology in order to determine if certain bat coronaviruses can be transmissible to humans. And in doing so, we've been making them more infectious and more transmissible. Those are the experiments we have been funding over the past however long we've been doing it, 2018, 2019. Now, what is really interesting about this is that right after we find this out, right after the letter has been sent to Congress, the NIH is very quick to cover its tracks. Essentially, they try to get rid of their responsibility, as I said earlier. According to this Roll Call News article, quote, the NIH, as well as independent virologists, emphasized that the virus EcoHealth was working on, which was named WIV1 after the Wuhan lab, is genetically too dissimilar to be an ancestor of the coronavirus known as COVID-19 and that caused the pandemic, end quote. So I'm no virologist, I am no scientist, but isn't it kind of odd that we're just supposed to believe that the pandemic, that the coronavirus that has sent the world in turmoil just wildly occurred, just out of nowhere. While at the very same time, we've just found out that the US has been funding experiments in China to make bat coronaviruses more transmissible to humans. I don't know. I find that pretty odd. Again, I'm not a virologist, and they're saying that it's impossible, genetically speaking, that the experiments that they were doing in the labs with coronaviruses are not the same as the one that infected the world. But to me, it just seems to that's really odd that as soon as we're funding these experiments to see if coronaviruses and bats can be more transmissible, that all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, a world pandemic occurs with the coronavirus. It's very odd to me. Now, I'm not going to say that they're responsible or anything, but it is quite odd. I'll let you draw your own judgments on that. Now, on a very similar note, booster mandates might become a possibility. So, we've talked about vaccine mandates, we talked about mask mandates, we talked about a lot of COVID stuff on this channel, and it seems like it's all I talk about on Pepp Talk, just because it's very relevant, and there's something going on with it every other week. And I think pretty soon we're going to try and stay away from this topic just because I don't want it to get boring, but it's very important to talk about. So, with the rise of these booster shots, with more people getting these booster shots, the CDC has come forward saying that it might be updating its definition of what it means to be fully vaccinated, meaning that if you live in LA, if you live in San Francisco, or in New York, in places that require you to be vaccinated in order to go into a restaurant, to get a sandwich, to get some food for lunch, you might indeed need to get the booster shot in order to do these things. So, according to the Washington Examiner, quote, the CDC director, Rochelle Walensky, has suggested that the definition of fully vaccinated may be subject to change now that the booster shots are becoming widely available, end quote. This, again, I sound like a broken record saying this, but it's just another prime example of how the government's response to COVID-19 is not at all about public health, but in fact about control. And I really sound like a guy with a tinfoil hat here, but I promise you it's true. First off, we started with mask mandates, which didn't make sense because masks don't really do anything unless you're wearing KN95 masks. And we know that the majority of people are not wearing those. 2, vaccine mandates don't make sense because we know that when you are vaccinated, you are essentially immune to the virus. You are immune from getting seriously ill from the virus. In fact, I'm going to read you some very specific statistics regarding the efficacy of the vaccines just to tell you how miraculous, how well these vaccines actually work against COVID-19. So, if you are vaccinated, then the vaccine is effectively 88% effective in preventing symptomatic disease, and it is 96% effective in reducing hospitalizations. And that is regarding the Delta variant of COVID-19, by the way. These numbers are higher when you're talking about wild type. So, vaccine mandates don't make sense because if you are vaccinated, if you've got your 2 shots, then essentially you have nothing to worry about. You don't have to worry about getting symptomatic disease or being hospitalized because of how effective these vaccines are. So if you were to somehow get the virus, right, a lot of people argue that vaccine mandates are necessary because you can still spread it to others. This is what I've heard on my TikTok, for instance, that vaccine mandates need to be had because you can still get the virus if you're vaccinated, which is true. Even though the vaccine is 88% effective in preventing you from getting symptomatic disease, you can still get the virus and you can still spread it to other people. But here's the problem. If you have the vaccine and you spread it to someone else, that person doesn't need to worry about getting it either because if they are vaccinated, they have the same level of defense as you do and they are not going to get seriously ill at all, no matter if they're elderly or they're a child. That's simply the case. Now, if they are unvaccinated, then the whole doesn't really matter what happens to them because the fact of the matter is, if they are unvaccinated at this point, that is on them. They've had the opportunity to get vaccinated at this point, and if they have not gotten the vaccine, it is simply because they have decided not to, and that's completely okay. And I don't mean to sound harsh when I'm saying this, but if I, a vaccinated person, get COVID-19 and I spread it to someone else who doesn't have the vaccine, I really don't feel all that sorry for them because they could get the vaccine anytime they want. And they haven't gotten it at this point, and the reason is because they didn't want it. So if they don't want it, they're going to suffer the repercussions for not getting it. That's simply how it works. There is no need for a vaccine mandate to mandate people to get the vaccine if they don't want to. If they don't want to get it, they don't need to get it. And if they get the virus as a consequence, then, well, that's the risk that they have taken upon themselves. That is individual risk assessment at play. And that is the way that this virus should be handled. If you want to get vaccinated, like you should, in my opinion, then get it. And if you don't want to get vaccinated for whatever reason, and that is your decision, you are taking on that risk, and that is perfectly okay. I do not believe it makes any sense for the government to mandate everyone to get vaccinated because it just simply doesn't make sense for public health safety reasons. Because if you're worried about getting sick, then you would get the vaccine. And when you have the vaccine, you are completely, essentially immune to any serious harm, no matter your age group at all. We've already talked about children who are too young to get the vaccine, who are actually more protected from the coronavirus than people who are of age to get the vaccine that are actually vaccinated. Yeah, so young kids, younger than 11 years old who can't get the vaccine yet are actually more protected from the virus than people who have the vaccine. That is how undangerous this disease is to children. So there is no excuse for anyone not having the vaccine other than the fact that they don't want it. And if that's the case, then that's on them. They've taken that risk assessment, and that is okay. It is not the government's decision to decide whether or not they get the virus or they get the vaccine. And with that, it doesn't make sense to have these mandates because they aren't helping anyone. If you don't want to get the virus and you're worried about it, you get the vaccine, and that's all you need to worry about. And you can go back to normal after that. And if you don't want the vaccine, then okay, you've taken that risk assessment upon yourself, and that's okay. They're not making the world any more dangerous because if the only people that they're going to hurt are other unvaccinated people. And again, like I said, anyone that's unvaccinated at this point is doing so at their own volition. So with that being said, it just doesn't make sense to have these vaccine mandates in place, let alone a booster mandate. So these booster shots that are now coming back to the forefront of the actual news that I want to talk about, the booster shots that are coming out now that are being proposed as a new guidance update are just a prime example of how the government is doing this as more of a control measure rather than a public health safety measure. Because again, if I, a 20-year-old male, have gotten the vaccine, there's no need for me to get a booster shot. There just isn't. Because if I get the vaccine, then I'm perfectly safe. And I'm not going to be hurting other people unless they don't have the vaccine. And if they don't have the vaccine, like I said, it's on them because they didn't want to get it. Now, booster shots, some people need to get the booster shots, for instance, maybe elderly people or immunocompromised people who are very susceptible to the disease. But otherwise, there's no need for a booster shot. And that is exactly why this idea that the term fully vaccinated might be updated in order to include booster shots simply doesn't make sense regarding public health, and is much more about control. And I mean, that's just simply all there is to say about that. Booster shots are needed for some, but not everyone. And with that being said, it doesn't make sense that it would be required for me to go get a booster shot, it's a 20-year-old, in order to go get a burger down the street in Los Angeles. But with that being said, I'll let you think about what's been going on. I'll let you think about what I said. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Am I wearing a tinfoil hat here? I don't know. Maybe I am. But I'll let you decide. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next week on Pepp Talk. Goodbye.